Rio wakes up and finds himself chilling in a realm of clouds, with an angel casually standing in front of him. First things first, the angel breaks the news. Yep, Rio just died. And no surprise here, it was another hidden run by the infamous truck cunt. But instead of heading to the afterlife, Michael, yep, the angel has a name, tells Rio he's getting a one-way ticket to another world. Now, unlike those other overachievers, Rio doesn't have to save the world, defeat a demon lord, or collect 7 magical socks. Nope, Michael says Rio has no mission. He's free to do whatever he wants. So, naturally, Rio requests a slow and relaxing life. Michael, being the bro he is, sets him up nicely with a basic rundown of this magical new world called Phi, where about 20% of the population can use elemental magic. Lucky for Rio, his most compatible element is water. To keep things cozy, Michael preps a starter pack that includes a small ice house, a 2-month food supply, and a protective barrier to keep monsters out. There's even a monster guidebook because you never know when something with teeth and claws will show up uninvited. With everything in place, Rio goes outside and tries his new powers. He shouts water ball, and boom, a ball of water pops up in his hand. Turns out, casting magic is easier than expected. In fact, he can even skip the chanting and just think it into existence. Naturally, he heads to the bathhouse, only to realize he can only make warm water. No hot bath equals no peace. So, he decides to make a fire. Problem is, he has zero clue how to do that. After some sun gazing and a light bulb moment, he makes a magnifying glass out of ice, don't ask how, just wizard things, uses sunlight to spark a fire, and finally heats his ice bath. Not bad for day 1 in magical survival mode. The next morning, over breakfast, Rio reflects. Michael gave him food for 2 months, but he'll have to hunt eventually. A butter knife isn't going to cut it, literally, so it's time to train. He tries blasting a water ball at a tree. It hits like a wet sponge, not very lethal. So, he experiments, compresses the water for a high-pressure jet. Great in theory, but in practice, it's more super soaker than deadly beam. He recalls Michael's advice, magic is all about imagination. So, he keeps practicing day after day. Eventually, his water jets get better, and he even learns to make hot water for proper baths. Though, controlling the temperature is still a work in progress. Next up, ice magic. This time, he tries forming ice straight from the air. It works? Eventually. Took around 3 to 4 business days, but who's counting? Sadly, unlike water, ice isn't as easy to throw around. Combat training isn't going great, and after hours of trial and error, Rio faceplants from mana exhaustion. He calls it a day. But when morning hits and his mana bar refills, Rio is back at it, because if he wants a chill life in a magical world, he's got to learn to chill and survive. This becomes Rio's daily grind for the next few weeks. Thanks to all the training, he can now summon ice instantly. Yep, no more waiting 3 to 4 business days. It's finally a viable attack. With his magical toolkit ready and his food stash running low, Rio heads out into the forest for his first real hunt. Right away, he spots a pair of animal footprints and follows them to a nearby river. While he's there, he finds some handy flint and realizes he can start fires by striking it against his sword. Primitive but effective. He also takes a moment to gather some detox herbs, because you never know when forest sushi might backfire. But then, growl. A low, rumbling sound behind him. Rio turns and freezes as a lesser boar locks eyes with him like it's ready for a one-on-one wrestling match. The boar charges, and since this is the first time Rio has ever been in a real fight, he mentally blue screens. Just before impact, he snaps out of it and jumps aside. Close call. Now that he's got his head in the game, he uses his magic. He whips up an ice track to make the boar slip, Mario Kart style, then follows it up with a series of ice spikes. Boom, instant, pointy death. After turning the boar into future bacon, Rio flips through his monster guide and learns that the lesser boar is literally the weakest thing in the forest. Not exactly encouraging. The guidebook is designed for rookies like him, but there are 2 ominous bonus pages at the end. One is about dragons, which, according to the book, can solo entire cities. The official advice: run. Unofficial advice: run faster. Not that it'll help. The second page mentions demons, but it's hilariously vague, basically just says, if you meet one, you're doomed. Great. Super helpful. The next day, Rio heads out to hunt again, but surprise! He gets ambushed from above by a giant assassin hawk. This bird isn't just big, it's packing wind magic and slashes through prey like it's got built-in razors. Ryo runs while conjuring ice shields on the fly. He doesn't want to fight this thing, but he's definitely not outrunning it either. So, he counters with water jets. The hawk dodges and swoops down with a slicing wind attack, but Ryo blocks it just in time with an ice shield. The blow smashes across the hawk's eye, sending it crashing to the ground. The hawk eventually gets up, now rocking an eye patch-worthy injury, and flies away. But not before locking eyes, with Ryo, making it personal. That bird's got beef now. Ryo, still alive and mildly traumatized, is starting to rethink what slow, peaceful life really means. While running from the hawk, he also manages to get completely lost in the forest until late at night. While wandering, he stumbles across a glowing lake, and in the middle of it, a dullahan just casually standing there. And it's already spotted him. As time passes, Ryo continues training like a man on a magical gym grind. He can now hunt and preserve food with ease, and his magic is looking seriously dangerous. He can summon massive sheets of ice and slam them down instantly, and his water jets are powerful enough to slice through solid rock. Not bad for a guy who couldn't heat bathwater a month ago. But combat training doesn't stop with ice. Ever since the dullahan encounter, Ryo has gone into the forest every night to fight it. It wasn't listed in the monster guide, so either it's not a monster or it's just too high level for beginners. Either way, Ryo isn't backing down. Armed with his trusty ice stick, he charges forward, swinging like a magical baseball champ against the headless nightmare. This whole thing with the dullahan is less of a deathmatch and more of an intense training montage. The headless horseman totally outclasses Ryo in both strength and skill, but that doesn't stop him from doing his best, blocking attacks with his trusty ice shields, only to get flattened in seconds anyway. Strangely, the dullahan never speaks a word, but Ryo can't shake the feeling that this creepy, silent warrior has taken it upon himself to play battle sensei. Then one day, the dullahan raises its sword and uses water magic to extend the blade, surprising Ryo, who had no idea it could use the same element. After showing off the magical blade, the dullahan casually hands it over to Ryo, then walks out onto the lake like some mysterious boss character on his break. Some time later, Ryo is out hunting again when, bam, he's suddenly ambushed by that same assassin hawk. Only this time, it's black. Ryo figures the hawk must have hit the gym and evolved, all to settle the score. Heady, maybe. Terrifying, definitely. The hawk dives in, launching wind slashes. Ryo panics and throws up 5 ice walls. But evolve hawk means stronger wind slashes, and those walls get shredded like wet tissue paper. Cue full-on panic mode. Ryo zigzags across the field, throwing up walls like a panicked Fortnite builder, dodging incoming attacks. He finally sees an opening and launches a volley of ice spikes, but the hawk speeds up and dodges like it's in an anime tournament arc. Then it screeches. Not just a regular screech, a magical, high-frequency, ice-melting screech that disrupts Ryo's magic, leaving him defenseless. Great. The hawk hovers in front of him, clearly charging up something massive. Ryo senses electricity in the air, then zap, a bolt of lightning fires at him. Luckily, he channels his inner survival instinct, uses a stick as a lightning rod, not OSHA-approved, and jumps clear just in time. Half-fried and still twitching, Ryo prepares for round 2 as the hawk dives in for the kill. At the last second, Ryo whips out his ice sword and parries the talons. After a few intense clashes, Ryo spots a gap in the hawk's guard, thanks to his grueling sparring sessions with the dullahan, and lands a clean stab through its neck. The hawk crashes to the ground. Ryo approaches it, understanding its desperation. It lost an eye to him and pushed itself to evolve, all to prove it was stronger. But Ryo trained too, and in the end, he won. As he walks home, Ryo is shocked, literally stunned, when a dragon appears out of nowhere. Remembering the monster guide books, warning, run, and pray, he freezes. But instead of roasting him alive, the dragon talks to him via telepathy. It's not hostile, it's actually searching for a black hawk that flew this way. Uh-oh. Ryo nervously explains that, yeah, he may have accidentally killed the hawk in self-defense. The dragon is surprised a human could do that, but doesn't seem angry. Instead, it notices the sword Ryo is carrying and recognizes it as the Fairy King's blade. For Ryo to have received it, he must have done something to earn the king's favor. The dragon, intrigued, decides to chat. Ryo, still pretty clueless about this world, jumps at the chance to ask questions. They talk for hours, sharing stories like old pals until evening comes. comes, and the dragon says it's time to head home. Rio thanks him for the chat, and the dragon thanks Rio too, saying it's been ages since he's had such a fun conversation. As they part ways, a scene cuts to Michael, back in heaven, casually going over Rio's reincarnation paperwork, and then he notices something odd. Turns out, Rio was granted a hidden trait, eternal youth. Weird, because Michael hasn't seen a hidden trait since that hero girl he sent to Faye 10,000 years ago. One day, Rio heads to the beach because he's been craving salt lately. But instead of seasoning, he finds a wrecked ship washed ashore. He checks for survivors and finds a body, but the guy's already dead. Just then, he hears grunting from the other side of the beach and, to his relief, discovers someone actually survived. Turns out, the ship was destroyed by a giant sea monster during a massive storm. The survivor, Abel, was sure he'd die, but instead wakes up in a warm bed with all his stuff neatly placed nearby. He heads outside to get his bearings but is met by Rio, who casually says he's glad Abel is up and about. Abel is surprised he didn't even sense Rio approaching and thinks his fashion sense is weird, but instead of being rude, he thanks Rio for saving him. Rio admits all he did was drag Abel's body back, and sadly, he was the only survivor. But Abel isn't too broken up, everyone else was an illegal smuggler anyway. Rio, still new to the concept of smugglers, offers to make lunch since Abel must be starving. Over lunch, Abel asks why Rio is only wearing a loincloth. Rio shrugs, he's broke, plus there are no towns nearby to even buy clothes. Abel's impressed by how well Rio is surviving alone. When he asks if Rio hunts with that tiny knife on the table, Rio casually shows off his water magic instead, filling a jug to demonstrate. Abel is amazed. On the Central Plains, only about half the people can use magic, which shocks Rio. Michael told him only 20% could. Someone's been giving outdated stats. After lunch, Abel asks Rio to take him back to the wreck since he needs to check something. On the way, he wonders why Rio doesn't use a magic staff, but quickly figures it's a money problem. To make up for his insensitivity, he insists on handling any monsters they encounter. Rio says that won't be necessary, but Abel wants to feel useful. When they reach the wreckage, all the bodies are gone, probably eaten by monsters. Abel's lucky Rio found him when he did. After searching, Abel can't find what he was looking for and decides to regroup with his friends, though he has no idea how far he is from the town of Lon. He fears it'll be a long, lonely journey, but then invites Rio to come along. Rio, curious about the world and with no real reason to stay, agrees, though he needs to handle some things first. They plan to leave the next morning. That night, Abel notices Rio heading into the forest, claiming he needs to meet someone. Suspicious but polite, Abel doesn't pry. Rio meets with the Dullahan, telling him he'll be leaving the forest soon, so this might be their last spar for a while. They fight hard. Rio has improved enough to push Dullahan back slightly, but the skill gap is still massive. Eventually, Rio collapses in defeat. As Dullahan walks back to the lake, Rio thanks him for all the training. Seeing Rio as a precious student, Dullahan gifts him a special robe, Rio's first proper clothing upgrade. The next morning, Rio and Abel set off on their journey. Rio takes one last look at his home before stepping into the wider world. But of course, no journey starts easy. Soon after, they encounter a boar monster. Abel asks Rio to stand back while he handles the boar. He draws his sword, shouts total impalement, and instantly blows a clean hole through the boar. Rio, stunned, asks what that was, and Abel explains that people who can't use magic rely on combat skills, techniques that let them pull off flashy moves like that. After a day's trek, they reach a marsh crawling with lizardmen. Not keen on a fight, Abel suggests sneaking around, but Rio senses they're being followed. When the lizardmen emerge, Abel prepares to fight, but Rio tells him there are too many, and then casually obliterates them with a barrage of icicles. Abel is speechless, but saves his questions until the fight's over. Afterwards, Abel asks what spell Rio just used. Rio shrugs, just regular icicles. But Abel insists mages can only cast one spell at a time, at least that's what some wind mage told him. Rio figures this must be a wind magic limitation since he's always been able to multitask with water. Later, Rio even conjures water for Abel, using a totally different incantation, because honestly, he just says whatever sounds cool. Eventually, they wander into a rock golem field, getting pelted with boulders. Abel uses his total impalement again, but the golems just heal instantly. Rio decides it's time for a new strategy. He asks Abel to back off, then summons a massive ice cube and crushes the golems with it, one by one. Only one golem is left, but it's not moving. They figure the golems drain energy from the ground, so when they fall, they're done. Inside the last golem, they find a massive magic stone, though it's a shame the others got smashed to bits. That night, while camping, Abel mentions that golems can also be found in dungeons. Rio's eyes light up. Dungeons. He's pumped, but Abel didn't mention them before because he didn't think Rio would care. Lucky for Rio, the only dungeon in the Central Plains is in Lon, their destination. Rio also asks about dwarves and elves. Abel explains, dwarves are short, strong, great craftsmen, and plenty live in Lon. Elves? They're more reclusive, living deep in forests, and Abel only knows one elf in Lon. The next morning, they continue north. Rio confidently says that past the mountains lies human civilization. Abel's curious how Rio knows this, having never visited a village. Truth is, a dragon told Rio, but he keeps that to himself. Abel would probably freak out. Suddenly, Rio senses danger. A giant griffin appears. Neither of them can win this fight, so Rio quickly tosses his stored meat to distract it. Abel follows suit, and thankfully, the griffin takes the offering and leaves. Abel remarks that monsters like griffins haven't been seen near humans for centuries. That means these mountains are keeping the worst creatures away, but also means they'll face even more beasts. And he's right. Next up, a pack of wyverns. Abel suggests sneaking past, but Rio is confident this time. He charges in, firing off ice spears and taking the wyverns down with ease, something that usually takes 20 adventurers. Abel is floored, but hey, he's not complaining. They keep fighting their way through and eventually make it to the other side of the mountains, one step closer to reaching civilization. Rio and Abel continue their journey, debating whether they should ever willingly face wyverns again. Rio's cool with it. More monsters, more fun, but Abel would prefer not to die. Thank you very much. That said, he's glad Rio took the wyverns down last time. They now have a hefty bag of magic stones worth a fortune. Eventually, they spot a thin road up north. Roads mean towns, so that's a win. Abel notices the path stretches toward what looks like Mount Everest to the east, so he suggests heading west instead. He recognizes the icy peaks, but stays quiet and just tells Rio that if they go east, they'll reach the town of Coyote. Hearing that, Rio is thrilled. He's been dreaming of sleeping in an actual bed. Abel, a little surprised, jokes that he thought Rio was more of a caveman who lives for monster fights. They discuss the local food in Coyote, which Abel praises highly, and before long, they arrive in town and hit up a restaurant. Over lunch, Abel tells Rio about adventure guilds, suggesting he registers since he's strong, and the guild card also works as an ID and grants access across the nation. Rio likes the idea, especially since Abel had to pay the gate fee for him earlier. Plus, guild members can trade magic stones and monster loot, though being an alchemist helps. Rio, a chemistry nerd, is now tempted to pursue alchemy. When the waitress serves curry and rice, Rio's jaw drops. This world has curry too. He chuckles to himself, thinking how other isekai protagonists have to invent earth foods from scratch. Yet here's curry ready to order. Naturally, he goes full mukbang mode, asking for seconds, then thirds. The next morning, he's still raving about the curry, making Abel wonder if Rio has ever eaten a decent meal before. Rio jokes that Abel must be keeping more secrets, an offhand comment that flusters Abel, hinting he might actually be hiding something. They continue through meadows and soon spot Lon, their true destination. At the gates, the guard recognizes Abel and is shocked. Word was that he'd gone missing. Abel just says Rio saved his life. The guard, grateful, shakes Rio's hand like they're lifelong pals. Since Rio isn't registered yet, Abel again pays the entry fee. As they walk, Rio realizes Abel is pretty famous and friendly with everyone. At the Adventurers Guild, Abel explains that new registrants start at rank F, but since he's vouching, Rio might jump to rank E or even D. Also, dumping all their magic stones at once might tank the market, so Abel wants the guildmaster's advice. Inside, everyone cheers to see Abel alive. Feeling like the awkward +1 at a reunion, Rio slips outside for a stroll, where he bumps into an elf girl. She notes his robe looks like the fairy king's attire, but leaves in a hurry before explaining more, promising to meet again. Abel eventually drags Rio back in, hyping him up as his lifesaver. Everyone thanks Rio, then returns to their drinks. At the counter, Abel pushes for Rio's registration, recommending a D rank. The receptionist is shocked. This is the Crimson Sword Party's first time endorsing anyone. Still, Rio needs to pass a physical test. Meanwhile, Abel requests a meeting with the guildmaster, who bursts in. Hugh, shocked they survive the mountain. Abel argues that anyone making it back alive deserves a higher rank. Hugh agrees to promote Rio, but before they finish, a team barges in. It's Abel's party members, Lynn, Warren, and Rhea. When Lynn sees Abel alive, she falls to her knees, unable to believe she's seeing him again. Abel walks over and apologizes for worrying them, admitting he would have died if Rio hadn't saved him. So, he tells them Rio deserves their gratitude. Hugh, sensing the party has catching up to do, excuses himself and tells the guild clerk, Nina, to prepare the materials for Rio's registration. As Rio tries to leave with Hugh, Abel calls out, asking him to wait by the guild afterward. They've got things to do. Outside, Hugh notices Rio's curiosity about Abel's popularity and explains that Abel's party, Crimson Sword, is the strongest in the city, and his absence threw the whole place into chaos. Rio asks if his registration will be done in dank, and Hugh confirms, noting that while Abel is strong, he clearly needed a capable partner like Rio, so there's no hesitation in registering him. In the office, Nina arrives with the forms. She asks Rio about his skills and whether he's ever been to a dungeon. He hasn't, so she recommends their monthly dungeon class, which Rio signs up for. He's surprised they have clocks here, but Nina explains there's a big one in the city center. She also offers lodging at the guild for 300 days post-registration. After the paperwork, she hands Rio his guild card, prints his details via a magic device, and registration is complete. Outside, Hugh is relieved Abel is back, lamenting how the city was a mess without him. Rio rejoins Abel, who takes him around town to sell their magic stones, planning to buy clothes and a staff for Rio. Rio appreciates it but is puzzled. He's fine without a staff since he's always carried a sword. Abel laughs, saying his sword is more like a glorified knife. During their errands, Rio peppers Abel with questions and learns this world has 24-hour days, 7-day weeks, and 30-day months, just like Earth. Combined with the curry he ate, he wonders if someone from Earth reincarnated here and changed the world. Later, Abel drags Rio to his welcome party, where they drink and celebrate all night. The next morning, Rio is exhausted. As he walks to the lodge with Na, she teases him about drinking too much and mentions how raw Abel's brother barely left his side in gratitude. At the lodge, Nina introduces Rio to his new roommates, Niels and Addo, who agree to keep things casual between them. Na then brings in a fourth roommate, Ian, a 16-year-old girl whose parents recently died, so she turned to adventuring. Na reminds Rio to attend class with Ian the next day. Meanwhile, Abel tells his party about Rio's insane feats, casting magic without a staff, killing wyverns with ice, and summoning giant ice blocks. Lynn doubts it, citing the known limits of magic, but Abel insists it's true. Rhea remarks that only the Inferno magician was said to be that powerful, though it's thought to be a myth. They also wonder if Rio could be a threat or ally to the Duhi Empire, but Abel assures them Rio despises that name. Meanwhile, Rio laughs and bonds with his new roommates, reflecting on how drastically his life has changed. Rio and his friends move to the special class for a professional course on the basics of exploring the Dees, aka magical monster mazes with a bad attitude. After the class, they'd head to a real Dees, which made Amun visibly tense, like sweating through your armor tense. But Rio, ever the chill one, told him not to panic just yet. They still had time, and no one wants to see him faint at noon like a drama queen. The instructor, now ready to wrap things up, offered to answer any final questions. Rio raised his hand and asked if there was a way to fast travel back to levels already cleared, classic gamer energy. The teacher was impressed. Unfortunately, he said that while some Dees in the southern provinces do have that option, the ones in Lawn City definitely do not. Rumors exist, but nothing confirmed. Rio thanked him politely. Then Amun, still processing the info, asked Rio what instant travel was, and marveled at how Rio knew so much despite being a D-rank newbie. Rio just shrugged. It was something he'd heard, not Google searched. They moved to the city's Dees, located smack dab in the center of the city, which had the charming trait of doubling its monster population every year. No one knew why. The teacher explained the inner walls were built to keep those multiplying monsters from turning the city into monster stew. Amun looked at the whole setup like it was the start of a natural disaster movie. But the teacher reassured him, this happens every few years, totally normal-ish. They passed the guild building near the gate where normally adventurers check in, but since they were pre-registered, they could stroll right in. Rio noticed Amun getting nervous again and advised him to breathe deeply, not hyperventilate. Amun did, felt better, and they entered the first level, which was basically the tutorial stage. Nothing too dangerous, but they were told not to stray too far from the D-skate. Rio and Amun stuck together and soon sensed something ahead. Amun drew his sword like a nervous anime sidekick, but Rio, cool as ever, pinpointed the location. He froze the creature, a beginner monster known as a soldier ant, and told Amun to go for the neck. Teamwork made the dream work. Amun pierced the ant's neck and landed the finishing blow. Both were thrilled, like kids who just beat their first boss fight. Rio, always the sentimental adventurer, suggested they take the ant's magic stone as a memento of their first successful hunt. Amun, ever the rule follower, asked if that was allowed. Rio reminded him, "We're adventurers now. Loot is life." He showed the stone and proudly declared it a lovely keepsake. Amun was kind of in awe. Later at their residence, they celebrated their first Dees mission. Niels sipped his drink, wishing it was wine. But Ito reminded him alcohol was forbidden. Apparently, tipsy adventurers make poor dungeon divers. Still, Niels didn't care. A win's a win. Ito praised Rio and Amun for taking down a soldier ant on their first try. Rio humbly said Amun did the stabbing, but everyone agreed the magic stone was the real trophy. Then Ito asked what they planned to do tomorrow. Amun wanted to go back to the Dees, but was nervous about going alone. Rio offered to accompany him, even to level 3. Amun lit up like a kid being offered extra dessert. Still, Rio found it odd they'd encountered an ant on level 1. Usually, that level's infested with boring bats. Niels agreed and said he'd also heard of soldier ants crawling up to the first and second levels recently. Suspicious. Cue Abel's dramatic entrance. He confirmed that soldier ants could tunnel up from lower levels. Rio, always the sass master, told Abel not to mess with rookies. But Abel was actually being helpful, and then asked if the 3 guys were Rio's roommates. He introduced himself and casually dropped the fact that Rio is strong, but also has some personality issues, the polite way of saying he's a lovable weirdo. He asked them to take care of him. Niels, unable to contain his fanboy energy, stood up and told Abel he was his hero and asked for a handshake. Abel, being cool, granted it and advised Niels not to overdo things and to work hard. Abel offered some sage advice to Niels. Staying alive is priority number 1 for any adventurer. Niels, taking that very seriously, promised to train smart, not just hard. Curious, Rio asked Abel why he was at the guild so late. Abel explained that their mission took longer than expected, and they were only just returning. Right on cue, Abel's team showed up, and Lehia was not thrilled to find him in Rio's room. Ria told Abel to stop running away from his responsibilities and report to the guild leader. But Abel, ever the noble procrastinator, claimed he was simply guiding the next generation. Lehia, unimpressed, called in backup Warren, who stepped forward and unceremoniously picked Abel up like a grumbling sack of potatoes. Abel, thoroughly annoyed, pleaded with Rio to do something. Meanwhile, Lehia approached Rio and stared at him like she was scanning for magic residue. Rio, a little weirded out, asked if something was wrong, until Ria called Lehia away. Ria apologized for the chaos. They had to take Abel back to the guild leader. Rio figured as much. After all, Abel was their team leader. Abel, however, looked at Rio like he'd just been betrayed in a reality show. While all this unfolded, Amun stood there, stunned by the drama. Ita, on the other hand, was starstruck by Ria, convinced she looked like an angel. Niels continued to fangirl over Abel, which made Rio ask him, "Seriously, what do you like about that guy?" Cut to Abel's team on their way to the guild master. Leah admitted she shouldn't have stared at Rio like that, but she was curious. Was he really a magician, as the rumor said? Ria agreed. Abel reassured them they'd see Rio's abilities soon enough. The next day, Amun was in a hurry, but Rio, cool as ever, told him to take it easy. They headed to the D-skate, checked in, and not long after entering, they were ambushed by 2 wolves. Rio took one down with ice arrows. The other lunged at Ian, but he countered with a solid strike. A third wolf suddenly appeared and almost got Ian, but Rio's ice magic saved the day again. Amun then finished the wolf off, but was left completely wiped out. Rio praised him and offered a handshake. Amun accepted it with pride. Rio noticed that Ian's swordsmanship looked a lot like Abel's and asked about it. Ian revealed that he was trained in his village by a master named Kiro, who studied at the royal capital and taught the Hume school style. That's where Ian got his skills. Rio figured Ian had a bright future ahead once he got used to adventuring. Ian guessed Rio was a magician but clearly also knew his way around a sword. Rio explained his style was self-developed and that he didn't consider himself a sword expert. He then checked if Amun had caught his breath. Amun insisted he was fine, but Rio warned him not to overdo it. His fighting style was demanding, but if mastered, could keep him safe from injuries. First step, cardio. Run, and run some more. He also told Amun that he'd traveled with Abel for a while, and even Abel, talented as he was, worked on fundamentals every day. Genius or not, you gotta train. That fired Amun up. He wanted to work just as hard as Abel. Rio smiled. That was the spirit. The next day, Rio skipped the D's. He had other plans. He went to the library, where the librarian pointed him toward the alchemy section and suggested he start there. Rio gathered useful books, but soon found himself overwhelmed. So he stepped outside to get some sun. That's when the sun got blocked. Yep, an eclipse. And things got weird. Suddenly, a fire blast came at Rio, which he managed to block just in time. A mysterious girl wielding fire magic appeared, mumbling something about a human being involved. She was clearly not here for a tea party. Rio wondered if she was an Akuma. She blasted more fire, but Rio countered with enhanced magic and a flurry of ice. She added wind attacks to her moveset, but Rio blocked those two, surprising her. Then she got serious, revealed her personal weapon, and launched a flurry of strikes. Rio held his ground, matching her moves. As sunlight peeked through the eclipse again, Rio launched a wave of ice arrows, but the girl dodged them, all like she had cheat codes. He realized she was using wind to boost her speed. She soared into the air and dove down, but Rio deflected her again. She then charged a fireball, but Rio beat her to it. Still, she kept attacking. He fired more arrows, and this time, she blocked with fire and earth magic, but couldn't dodge everything. Some arrows hit, and she was injured. Rio saw his chance, soared up, and attacked, but she blocked again. Her wounds healed freakishly fast, throwing Rio off his rhythm. She pushed him back and prepared another massive fire attack. But then something unusual happened. Water droplets began falling. The first one hit her and burned her. She winced in pain and used earth magic to defend. She summoned a huge wave of fire as a final move, but the sunlight returned. The girl sighed. Her time was up. She hadn't had a fight this fun in ages. Rio told her to leave already. She smirked, saying he'd enjoyed it too, and this isolated place had strange rules. Her powers were limited here, and she vanished just before explaining what that isolation meant. Rio was left with one thought. What was that place? The girl then introduced herself to Rio as Leonor and asked for his name. Rio told her and even pronounced her name correctly, Akuma, which shocked Leonor since he knew who they were. Honestly, she should have finished him off right then and there, but Rio wasn't someone you could just eliminate during a coffee break. As the sun began to rise completely, Leonor said she wanted to meet him again. Rio, however, politely declined in his head, but she insisted that it was impossible for them not to cross paths again, and if it wasn't with her, it'd be with another one of the Akuma. She then made it awkwardly possessive by saying, "Don't let anyone else kill you but me. Your life now belongs to me." After dropping that dramatic line, she vanished. Rio, who clearly wasn't paid enough to deal with this kind of chaos, muttered that he survived by sheer miracle. If not for his special outfit, he would have had a hole in his shoulder. He was now exhausted and suffering from dizziness, classic RPG side effect. He dragged himself to the guild and discovered a fat bag of money waiting for him. He didn't even think this cash was in his account, but apparently, the guild master had already exchanged the wyvern stones. Suddenly, money wasn't a problem anymore, so maybe no need to grind side quests for a while. When he returned to his dorm, he found it suspiciously empty. He headed to the library to buy books, but peeked out the window and saw his dorm mates lying face first on the ground, clearly beaten up. Another student had done the honors. Niels said that if they weren't so drained, they could have taken them too. Wishful thinking, buddy. One of the thugs scoffed at the empty threat, but Ito called him out for talking big when he literally ambushed them. The bad guy just shrugged and said, "Do monsters and Deus warn before attacking?" Too bad his goons suddenly collapsed, having been whacked by none other than Rio himself. Rio told the main goon he was right. They shouldn't have warned him. Then he decked him. Niels helpfully identified the guy as Dan from room 1. Rio looked unimpressed and asked, "What do you want now, Dan? Gonna crawl away with your tail between your legs?" Dan didn't like that and tried to hit Rio, but Rio easily dodged and smacked him so hard he hit the ground. Niels noticed how badly Rio hurt Dan, while Rio figured he might still be a little too tense from that whole Akuma situation. He pulled out a healing potion and started with Ito, since he was a priest. They also decided to have Ian join their training. Niels felt slightly humiliated by how chill Rio was about all this. Seeing they were all kind of broken, Rio suggested they take a break and clean up. Afterward, Ito cast a healing spell on Rio, and it worked. Rio was genuinely happy and finally believed that Ito was, in fact, a priest. He thanked him sincerely. Ito explained that although the earlier attack didn't break any bones, it was dangerously close to being lethal. If it had hit the heart, game over. Rio admitted that his heart was the target, but luckily, he dodged at the last second. Niels, still shocked, asked, "Wait, if you're that strong, why dodge?" Ian chimed in with, "Who are you even fighting?" Rio just smiled and said that he'd tell them everything someday. To himself, he thought about how Leonor was an Akuma, and based on what she said, there were likely many more. He realized he had a lot to uncover in this strange world. The next day, Ito, Alman, and Nils head back into the dungeon. After taking out a goblin archer on the 5th floor, yes, 5th, Nils suggests they call it a day. They've barely been down there long, but something feels off. Goblin archers aren't supposed to appear this early in the dungeon, and since they've already made decent coin, there's no point risking it. Good call, because just a little deeper in, a monster was lurking that would have wiped the floor with them, especially with Rio off doing his own thing. Meanwhile, Rio is outside the city, having a dramatic post-battle reflection session after his intense clash with Leonor. While they were evenly matched in spell casting, her wind magic made her zippy as lightning. Rio sadly doesn't have wind magic in his toolkit, so he's experimenting with alternatives. His big idea? Use his water jet spell, normally for swimming, to boost movement on land. First test, a bit of ice on the ground, a few jets on his back, and he barely budges. Majestic fail. He plans to try again with more jets, but first, off to the library for research on alchemy and demons. Because who needs leg day when you have magical propulsion? Back in the city, Lihaya aka Lin is on a spell book scavenger hunt, searching for anything resembling that giant ice cube spell Abel swears he saw Rio use. Not even the forbidden books mention it, which means one thing, it's probably an original spell, but one requiring a ton of mana. She's still skeptical that Rio managed it so casually. Just as she closes her book, in strolls the elf girl Sarah, who greets Lin like an old buddy. Lin explains her spell hunting dilemma, and Sarah offers to help, though she's just back from a mission to the royal capital and running late for a meeting. Classic elf exit. Meanwhile, the boys, Ito, Alman, and Nils report to Nina at the guild front desk about their brief dungeon dive. She's surprised they're back so soon, but Ito explains and hands her the magic stone. Nina confirms it came from a goblin archer on the 5th floor, which is not okay. She hurries up to inform the guildmaster and thanks the boys for the crucial heads up. Upon hearing the news, the guildmaster is just as stunned. Goblin archers shouldn't show up before the 10th floor. He asks Nina how many high-ranking parties are currently in town. The options? Abel's party, Crimson Sword, and the White Brigade. He tells Cena to summon them all for a serious meeting. Not long after Abel arrives, but he's less than thrilled because he hears White Brigade will be joining, and their leader Phelps is not exactly his favorite person. Sure enough, Phelps is already there, smug as ever. After a frosty hello, everyone settles in as the guildmaster explains the situation. A rookie group encountered a goblin archer way too early in the dungeon, and it's likely a sign of a coming Tidal Bore. It's been 10 years since the last one, so yeah, red flags everywhere. He offers both parties 100 gold up front, 200 more upon return, to investigate, not to fight. If they find evidence of the Tidal Bore, they are to return immediately. Once confirmed, the guildmaster will shut the double walls of the dungeon and call for reinforcements from the regional knights. The guildmaster has already secured permission from the local lord to act, but he still needs to inspect the dungeon before making any major moves. So, he asks the big question, are they willing to take the job? Both Abel and Phelps agree on behalf of their parties, and the investigation is set for the next morning. Meanwhile, Rio wakes up early with big nerd energy. He's heading to the city's northern library to learn more about alchemy. Ito casually mentions that only D-rank adventurers and above are allowed in, but no worries, Rio qualifies. Alman does point out that the real juicy stuff, like forbidden texts, is B rank and up, so Rio shouldn't get his hopes up about accessing those. Bummer. Soon, Soon, Rio arrives at the Northern Library, which makes the Southern Library look like a corner bookstore. The place is huge, and he realizes he might need help finding the demon-related texts he's definitely not supposed to be talking about out loud. Lucky him, right as he's climbing the stairs, he runs into Sarah. Both are surprised to see each other, and the timing couldn't be better. Back at the dungeon, Crimson Sword and White Brigade are all gathered outside the gate, ready for the investigation. But right as the guildmaster is about to open the gates, Abel gets that classic main character gut feeling and stops him. He asks Lehia to use wind magic to scan the first layer of the dungeon. She does, and it's not good. Over 100 monsters are camped out right at the entrance. Translation: the Tidal Bore has already begun. The guild master wastes no time. He declares a state of emergency and calls on every available adventurer to prep for battle. It's all hands on deck. Meanwhile, back at the library, Sarah formally introduces herself to Rio and is pleasantly surprised to see him again. When she asks what he's doing there, Rio is about to say researching demons, but realizes that sounds a little sketchy. So instead, he goes with studying alchemy, which, while still nerdy, is less alarming. Sarah is intrigued. Rio casually mentions he wants to build a golem someday. No big deal. Sarah laughs because that's no small feat, but she offers to help him get started. She knows the library like the back of her elven hand. As they walk together, she asks if Rio likes reading. He says he loves books, but hasn't had many chances to read lately. The way he says it, though, sounds like he just escaped a 200-year slumber. Sarah chuckles, but Rio just awkwardly changes the subject by complimenting her being an elf. She admits it's rare for elves to live in human cities, so yeah, she's a little weird, but if staying in the city meant meeting Rio, she wouldn't change a thing. Smooth. While they're bonding over books and awkward elf compliments, the dungeon situation goes full apocalypse mode. All the gates slam shut, and adventurers take their positions on the walls. Then, with dramatic timing, the dungeon's main gates burst open and hundreds of goblins come charging out. Archers loose volleys of arrows. Mages light up the battlefield with fireballs. It's chaos. And it's only just begun. Whenever someone gets injured, they're rotated out of formation for healing so they can jump right back into the action, like a battle royale with a healthcare plan. But with goblins pouring in like it's Black Friday at a sword sale, even the guild master is starting to sweat. Phelps tells his party to conserve energy, and Abel warns Lynn not to go full monomaniac too early. Sadly, they're running low on arrows, and Abel is questioning how much longer they can hold out before the goblins start asking for autographs. Luckily, a few moments later, Niels shows up with a few other bold and possibly reckless adventurers, hauling every arrow they could lay hands on, basically a mobile ammo drop. Along with that, Niels delivers a message from the guildmaster. Once the smaller goblins are handled, Crimson Sword and White Brigade are up next to face the boss. A few hours pass, and most of the regular goblins have been reduced to XP. Now the boss is expected to show. The guildmaster gives the signal. Both Crimson Sword and White Brigade leap from the wall, like synchronized gymnasts, with Lynn casting a magic spell to ensure a graceful landing. No broken ankles today. There are still a few goblins lurking below, so Abel and Phelps clear them out like pest control pros. Then it happens, the big bad emerges. But plot twist, it's not one goblin general, it's 3. That's bad. 3 generals usually means there's a goblin king nearby, which is like a boss fight on nightmare difficulty. Abel quickly forms a plan. He and Phelps will each take a general, while Rhea and Sheena go after the 3rd. Everyone nods like action movie heroes, then springs into battle. Abel dodges one of the generals and slices off its arm like he's ordering deli meat. Victory seems close, until he senses something off. Suddenly, he shouts for everyone to get down. A wind slash tears through the air, instantly slicing all 3 goblin generals in half. Dramatic much. Everyone narrowly avoids becoming Sushi, the attacker. None other than the Goblin King, and this guy did not come to mess around. Abel and Phelps charge in. Phelps tries to spear him, but the king's armor is tougher than overcooked steak. He falls back, realizing brute force won't cut it, literally. But Abel keeps going, dodges the king's attack using his perfect shadow technique, probably trademarked, and lands a strike to the chest. It's not a kill shot, but Abel never expected to solo the big guy. That's when he calls out to Lynn, who's been charging a wind bullet spell like a magical sniper prepping the final shot. As Abel jumps out of the way, she fires and turns the Goblin King into Swiss cheese, finally ending the Goblin Crisis. After the battle, everyone heads back to the guild to celebrate their hard-won victory. By the time Ryo finally strolls in, he has no idea why the place is buzzing like a festival. The adventurers are laughing, drinking, and piling up empty plates, like trophies, while the poor guild master is buried elbow-deep in paperwork. He's got reports to write about the Tidal Bore, payments to process for all the adventurers who helped, and the looming headache of royal researchers who are bound to show up demanding data. Some people get ale, some people get administrative trauma. At the party, Abel fills Ryo in on what went down during the Tidal Bore while he was off in the library. Lin, who has been itching to ask him this in person, corners Ryo and demands to know whether he really can conjure thick ice walls at a distance. Ryo nods, casually saying, "Yep, about 40 meters out." Of course, he admits it took ages to master. Even so, Lin is floored. She's never heard of magic working so far away. She asks if it's an original spell and what incantation he uses. Ryo shrugs and says he just makes them up on the spot. Imagine her face when she realizes he's basically freestyling magic like it's slam poetry. Before she can press him further, Nils points out most of the food is gone. If Ryo doesn't hurry, he'll be left with cold scraps and regrets. As he runs off to secure his plate, Abel casually drops the bombshell. Ryo doesn't even need incantations. He just chants because he thinks it sounds cool. Lin is left staring, wondering if the universe is playing a prank on her. The next morning, Nils, Alman, and Ito drag themselves to the guild, only to find the job board emptier than their wallets. Ryo wanders by and asks why they're not out working. Turns out the dungeon is shut down for inspections after the Tidal Bore, and resource-gathering jobs are basically dead since so much loot was dropped yesterday. When asked what he's up to, Ryo explains he's hunting for magic copper or to practice alchemy. Ito recalls it costs a fortune, 50 gold for a single piece. Ryo, who's rich enough not to blink at that, instead offers the trio a deal, 4 gold coins each just to search, plus 25 gold for every piece they bring back. The boys nearly faint. This is more than they've ever made in their lives. Ito, still half skeptical, asks if Ryo is serious. Ryo grins and explains that even if they succeed, he'll still spend less than buying in town. They're sold and the three rush out to start mining, like their lives depend on it. Meanwhile, Ryo hears shouting outside. Curious, he heads downstairs, where he finds Dan squaring off with a group of knights. The knights are trying to drag off a girl against her will, and Dan, in full heroic mode, shoves one of them aside to free her. Noble, yes, but the math is bad. 1 guy versus 4 armed knights. Just as their leader raises his sword to teach him a lesson, fate intervenes. The knight takes a single step forward and immediately trips flat on his face. Everyone is baffled when the knight faceplants, because there's absolutely nothing near his feet. The knight, however, refuses to admit he tripped over thin air and instead accuses Dan of foul play. But when he tries to stand up, he promptly trips again. Gravity, 2, knight, 0. Enter Phelps Heimline, looking every bit like the dad who just walked in on his kids breaking something expensive. He's appalled at the knight's behavior. At first, the knights puff up their chests, trying to intimidate him since knights technically outrank adventurers in the city. Big mistake. Turns out Phelps isn't just an adventurer, he's also a noble. And not just any noble. His dad, Alexis Heimline, was the former captain of the Royal Knights. The second they hear his name, the knights realize they've basically threatened someone who could end their careers with a raised eyebrow. Phelps tears into them for disgracing knighthood and warns them to get lost before he changes his mind. Once they scurry off, he glances at Ryo because he caught what really happened earlier. He'd already heard from Abel that Ryo's magic was crazy impressive, but seeing knights mysteriously trip from a distance, that's next level. Still, he keeps the secret to avoid dragging Ryo into royal drama, though he's grateful for the quiet assist. Later that night, Ryo is grabbing a bite at the tavern when Abel wanders in alone. Seeing him without his party, Ryo immediately jumps to the obvious conclusion. Ah, so you're sneaking off to the red light district. Cue Abel's panic and frantic shushing before half the tavern hears him. Using his genius deductive reasoning, Ryo decides Abel must have a crush. He briefly suspects Lin, but Abel blurts out she already likes Warren. That leaves Rhea, which only makes Abel flail harder, pretty much confirming it. Ryo won, Abel 0. Once Rio is done teasing, Abel explains the real problem. One of the dungeon investigators in town is his old friend, escorted by the same rotten knights from earlier. Tonight those knights are in the pleasure district, and Abel wants to stop them before someone gets hurt. On their way, Rio notices two unfamiliar adventurers lurking around, dressed head to toe in black. The moment they're spotted, the shady pair ducks out, suspicious. Sure enough, when Rio and Abel deliberately take a dark alley, they get ambushed. Too bad for the ambushers. Rio just drops ice on their heads and knocks them all out in seconds. Probably the easiest fight of his career. They don't know what the men were up to, but they'll be handed over to the guards for questioning. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the district, those disgraced knights decide to get revenge on Phelps. They sneak up on him, but suddenly can't move a muscle. Turns out the whole thing was a trap. Phelps knew they were dirty and had Shenna hit them with paralytic needles. With the knights frozen like statues, Phelps calls on her fire magic and reduces them to ashes. No ashes, no evidence, no problem. The next morning, as predicted, the research team from the royal capital arrives and immediately makes themselves unpopular by commandeering the town's entire food supply for the investigation. To make matters worse, Clive insists that Hugh McGrath reopen the dungeon and assign adventurers as escorts, despite not knowing whether it's safe. Hugh protests, but Clive reminds him that he has full authority. Luckily, the advisor Arthur steps in, apologizes for Clive's behavior, and promises to replace the stolen supplies. That earns Hugh's gratitude, though Clive remains stubborn about reopening the dungeon. Eventually, Hugh concedes and agrees to let them in. Hugh McGrath makes it very clear, if anything goes wrong in the dungeon, neither he nor the city of Lou will take the blame. It's all on Clive. Suddenly, Clive's smug confidence takes a hit, because now he realizes he'll be the one roasted if things go sideways. Still, after all the arguing he's done, there's no backing out without looking like a fool. So he reluctantly accepts the deal. But there's still one issue: finding adventurers to escort the research team. A little later, Rio is on his way to grab some much-needed lunch when a girl rushes up, asking if he can take her to the Adventurers Guild. Slightly grumpy about the delay, Hungry Mage is a dangerous mage. He helps her anyway. The girl introduces herself as Natalie Schwarzhoff, carrying a letter requesting the aid of Abel's party to defend the dungeon investigators. Rio is surprised. The dungeon was supposed to stay sealed, but Abel quickly guesses someone twisted Hugh's arm to reopen it. The closure made sense. Decades ago, right after a Tidal Bore, an elite A-rank party went down to investigate and never came back. Their leader was basically S-rank Superman with a sword, and even he vanished. Since then, guild policy has been simple. Tidal Bore equals lock the dungeon doors. While Rio is intrigued, his stomach wins the battle, so he excuses himself to go eat. After he leaves, Lynn asks Natalie if she's really from the famous Schwarzhoff family, renowned for legendary water magic. Natalie confirms it, so Lynn asks if she's ever heard of magic that could summon an ice wall at a distance. Natalie hesitates, saying it sounds impossible. That's when Abel chimes in, well, believe it or not, Rio can casually toss up an ice wall 40 meters away. He then warns everyone, half seriously, that if they ever consider picking a fight with Rio, they should just not. Even if they all ganged up together, they'd still lose. To drive the point home, he tells Natalie that if she ever needs help, and his party isn't around, she should go straight to Rio. Best emergency contact ever. 3 days later, Rio's friends return from their mission with 2 magic copper ores. Rio pays them 90 gold coins, enough for them to live comfortably for a while, which makes him their favorite person ever. Meanwhile, in the dungeon, the investigation team has reached the 7th floor. Oddly, not a single monster has appeared. Puzzled but undeterred, they push deeper until they discover a mysterious black square embedded in the wall. None of them recognize it, but Clive is ecstatic. This is prime research gold. He orders everyone to set up equipment and start analysis, with Natalie and the surface team ready to process data. Unfortunately, the excitement doesn't last. The moment they stick the monodensity gauge into the strange black gate, the entire team is instantly teleported away, vanishing without a trace. The surface team, including Natalie, loses contact completely. By the time the expedition team realizes what's happening, they find themselves standing in the middle of a grassy plain. Thankfully, nobody is hurt, but they have no clue where they are, and Clive and his research team are nowhere to be seen. Elsewhere in the fields, Clive wastes no time ordering his team to start collecting data. If his hypothesis is right, then the gate really did teleport them to a new location. Translation: they've just been isekai'd without consent. That also means there's a very real risk of being attacked. so everyone needs to stay on guard. Still, Clive can't help but feel a little thrilled. This accident could prove his theory that monsters from Tidal Bores actually originate from the 38th floor. And since he's the one who discovered the teleportation gate, he's already imagining the promotion, head of the department, prestige, maybe even a bigger office with a window. Of course, that only matters if he and his team actually make it out alive, and considering the local wildlife, survival isn't guaranteed. Back on the surface, Natalie and the other researchers are frantically trying to figure out what happened to the missing adventurers when the locator suddenly flickers back to life. It only transmits a signal for a split second, not enough to communicate, but it reveals something baffling. Somehow, the expedition team has ended up on the 40th floor. That makes no sense at all. They were just on the 10th floor. Just then, a man named Christopher walks into the tent, introducing himself as a researcher from the College of Magic. Technically, his group and Natalie's are rivals, but he sets that aside for now. He needs to know if anything unusual has happened in the dungeon, and he politely asks for information. The researchers hesitate. This is sensitive information after all. But Christopher presses on, explaining that just a short while ago, he entered the dungeon with the adventurers assigned to the second research expedition. Right as they were crossing the threshold, everyone in front of him vanished. That's why he's so desperate for answers. His account confirms the terrifying truth. The adventurers really were teleported, which explains how they ended up on the 40th floor. Unfortunately, that doesn't make the situation any less dire. At this point in history, no adventurer has made it past the 38th floor. From there onward, even elite parties struggle to survive, let alone the C and D rank adventurers dragged into this mess. Thankfully, Abel's party is among those caught in the first expedition. At least for now, they should be able to hold things together and protect the others. Still, unless a rescue plan comes together soon, things are going to get very bad very fast. Things are about to get very bad very fast unless someone figures out a way to rescue the expedition team. When Natalie learns that Abel and his entire party are trapped in the dungeon, she remembers his parting words to her. Without wasting a moment, she rushes off to the library in search of Rio, because if anyone can help, it's him. Meanwhile, at the guild, Nina bursts into Hugh's office with grim news. The investigation team that entered the dungeon has suddenly vanished, and all contact with them has been lost. To make matters worse, Dean Christopher is requesting Hugh's immediate presence to sort out the situation. Hugh, who had been enjoying the peace of his desk work, read, probably napping with paperwork as a pillow, jolts upright and announces he's heading out right away. Before leaving, he orders Nina to keep the details strictly secret. If the remaining adventurers hear about this, panic could spread faster than ale at a tavern happy hour. At the same time, Ryo is wandering the library in his usual scholarly struggle. He's desperately trying to research eclipses and tidal bores, but has no idea where the right books are. Honestly, at this point, he'd be thrilled if the books found him instead. Luckily, his wish is granted in a different form. Sarah happens to be standing in the next aisle. Overjoyed, Ryo rushes to her and explains his plight. Sarah, being the walking encyclopedia she is, immediately offers to help. She even shares her personal theory. Eclipses and tidal bores are connected. She's noticed that historically, tidal bores occur within days of an eclipse, a pattern that repeats time and again. Of course, she had to dig through mountains of old records to piece that together. So naturally, she's curious why Ryo suddenly cares about this subject. Ryo, who cannot exactly admit, "Oh, I fought a demon during the last eclipse. No big deal," skillfully changes the subject. He asks instead why magic stones change color. Sarah can't tell he's hiding something, but she lets it slide for now. She explains that the color of a magic stone reflects the monster's age. The longer it lived, the deeper the hue. That catches Ryu's attention. According to reports, every magic stone from Tidal Bore monsters has been perfectly clear. That suggests those monsters had only just spawned in, not migrated up from lower levels as most people believe. Even more surprising, Sarah reveals this phenomenon is recorded in all past Tidal Bore incidents. Ryo is shocked. He didn't think such detailed records existed here. Sarah explains that technically they barely do. The records are ancient, written on fragile parchment, and even the librarians don't know about them. Fortunately, she knows exactly where they're kept and offers to guide him. Meanwhile, back with the investigation team, morale isn't looking great. They still have no idea where they are, or even if they're still inside the dungeon. Being randomly teleported without a map compass, or Google Earth is not exactly a confidence booster. Arthur asks the researchers if any of their tools are back online, and he's told that the transmitter is working again. In theory, that means the surface team should be able to locate them now. The others cheer up at the thought of rescue, but Arthur isn't convinced. When Abel asks what's bothering him, Arthur explains that the air here feels off. If he had to put it into words, it's similar to standing inside a sanctuary square spell, the ultimate defensive magic that blocks both physical and magical attacks. If that's the case, then they're probably stuck inside some kind of barrier designed to cut them off completely from the outside world. Realizing the seriousness of the situation, Abel asks Lehia to cast her probing spell. She complies, sending out her winged magic, which detects a group of about 100 humans roughly 500 meters away. However, among them are around a dozen life forms she doesn't recognize. Suspicious? Absolutely. But with no better leads, they decide to head toward the group. Meanwhile, back on the surface, Hugh is informed that the investigation team has somehow been teleported all the way down to the 40th floor. He can't believe their luck, or rather, their terrible luck. Even if he gathered every adventurer in town, they'd never make it that deep. To make matters worse, they don't even know what caused the teleportation in the first place. Christopher insists it would be far too risky to send in another expedition now. All they can do is wait and hope the team somehow survives. Unfortunately, the team is anything but safe. Hellfire rains down on Clive's research unit. Some mages manage to throw up shields just in time, but many aren't so fortunate. Clive, scrambling to process the chaos, realizes with dread that their attackers resemble the very demons he once read about in dusty records. And if those records are true, then the polite way of putting it is, they're doomed. A few brave adventurers charge ahead to catch the demons off guard, but within seconds they're torn apart and the survivors are burned to ash. Abel's group arrives just in time to witness this bloodbath, their horror plain as day. Nina takes one look at the monsters and recognizes them immediately: demons. She warns everyone that, according to ancient records, demons are enemies of gods and angels themselves, far stronger than any normal human. Defeating one is a legendary featuring facing multiple. That's a recipe for early retirement in the grave. There are plenty of questions about why demons would be here at all, but Arthur cuts through the panic. Questions later, saving lives now, he barks, ordering the mages to prepare for a pincer attack. Just as Clive and his battered team are about to be overwhelmed, a barrage of magical javelins tears through the three demons bearing down on them. The mages unleash every spell they know, raining down fire, ice, lightning, and probably a few spells they just made up on the spot. The sheer volume of magic finally cracks through the demons' defenses. The battlefield is chaos. There are still plenty of demons left, so Arthur shouts for everyone to prepare another barrage. The demons hurl fireballs in retaliation, but the mages already have shields up, blocking the flames like pros who actually did their homework for once. For a moment, Arthur dares to hope they can win if they keep up this pace. But there's a catch. Mana doesn't grow on trees. Once the mages run dry, the frontline fighters will have to step in. That means it's Abel's turn to shine or get roasted. He unsheathes his sword and scans the battlefield, spotting one demon that looks extra terrifying, as if it came straight out of a "do not fight this thing" manual. Rallying his team, he orders them to line up behind Lewin, who shields them from waves of fire as they charge. Once close enough, Abel cuts down demons left and right while Lehia and Rin fire spells to pierce through their defenses. The plan works until Lehia collapses from mana exhaustion, and Rin is nearly tapped out as well. That leaves Abel swinging steel solo. 6 demons remain, but Rin warns him that the biggest, scariest one is no ordinary foe, it's a demon prince. And if the records are right, only a hero has ever beaten one. That's the kind of fun fact you'd rather not hear right before fighting. Still, Abel doesn't hesitate. Sure, the demon prince is terrifying, but hey, at least it's not as bad as fighting that griffin last time. He dives in, managing to slice down 2 demons in one go. Unfortunately, this gets the demon prince's full attention. The monster instantly blasts an energy beam toward Rin and Lehia, forcing Lewin to shield them, only to be thrown back along with both mages. Now it's just Abel and the demon prince, one-on-one. For half a second, Abel convinces himself he might have a chance. Then the demon prince flash steps right in front of him, smacks his sword aside, and casually reminds him, "Nope, you don't." Keeping calm on the outside, but panicking on the inside, Abel braces himself. Clive tries to help from afar with a powerful spell, but it barely scratches the demon prince. Worse, the remaining demons immediately turn their attention to his group, shattering their shields and leaving them wide open to the flames. Realizing things are spiraling fast, Abel decides to gamble everything. As the demon prince charges, he activates his zero-turn skill. With lightning precision, he deflects the prince's blade and pivots to strike at its neck. Except the demon prince sees it coming, dodges effortlessly, and backhands Abel across the battlefield like he's nothing more than an annoying fly. Abel can barely stand, his body giving out as the demon prince steps forward, raising his blade for the finishing blow. At the very last second, Abel hears the faint sound of a single drop of water. In that instant, Rio comes crashing through the ceiling. Rio is relieved he managed to find Abel in time, but Abel can hardly believe his eyes. Convinced he's hallucinating, he never would have expected Rio to show up at such a critical moment. Rio tells him that many people are worried about him and the others, so they should return as soon as possible. He'll deal with the monsters here in the meantime. Abel tries to warn Rio that their opponent is a demon prince, but Rio dismisses it with a smile. He's fought a full-fledged demon before, and compared to her, this one doesn't seem nearly as threatening. Still, since it's essentially a baby demon lord, its weakness makes sense. The demon minions unleash volleys of fire at Rio, but he casually counters with a barrage of icicle lances, freezing and decapitating them before they even realize what's happening. Their severed heads hit the ground, and the demon prince instantly understands that Rio isn't like the others. It won't be easy to take him down. The prince tightens his grip on his sword and readies for battle. Rio, eager for a little fun, draws his own blade to see just what this so-called demon prince is capable of. Before all this chaos, Natalie sprinted across town like a woman on a mission, desperately searching for Mihara, Rio. When she finally tracked him down, she practically shouted that Abel and his party were trapped in the dungeon. The moment Rio heard those words, he didn't waste time with questions. He immediately conjured an ice cart around Natalie and sped her off to the dungeon entrance like an overworked taxi driver. By the time they arrived, Natalie had already filled in Rudo, one of the adventurers, on the situation. He understood how dire things were, but he couldn't help wondering how Natalie even knew to look for Rio. Natalie explained, a few days earlier, Abel had told her that if she was ever in serious trouble and couldn't reach him, she should find Rio, because in Abel's words, Rio is the most reliable person I know. Rio may or may not be blushing at this point, but let's keep that between us. Grateful but short on time, Rio dashed straight for the dungeon gate. The adventurers on guard tried to stop him, but Rio simply walled them off with ice and slipped in, because who has time for bureaucracy when your friends are on the 40th floor? Instead of taking the slow stair route, Rio cut straight through the floors with water jets, essentially speedrunning the dungeon like a pro gamer. Inside, the demon prince made the first move, charging at Rio. Unfortunately for the demon, its speed was less unstoppable killing machine and more laggy NPC. Rio sidestepped effortlessly and lopped its head off in one swing. Abel and the others were stunned. Could it really be that easy? Of course not. The demon prince simply picked up its severed head and popped it back on, which must have been humiliating, like tripping in front of your crush, but way bloodier. Rio sighed, unimpressed by the regeneration trick. To prove his point, he conjured over 200 water jets and shredded the demon's body into confetti. No chance of respawning after that. With the threat gone, Abel thanked Rio, but Rio smirked and said, "Save the speeches if you really want to thank me. Dinner's on you." Fable Abel the Wallet Warrior, here we go. Then Arthur, an advisor from the Bureau of Royal Magicians, stepped up to introduce himself and thank Rio, saying they'd all be dead without him. But Rio brushed it off, insisting he just couldn't stand by while people were in danger, and wishing he had arrived sooner to prevent more casualties. Arthur, sobered, agreed and ordered preparations for collecting the fallen so they could be honored with a proper burial. Meanwhile, Abel asked Rio to help him gather magic stones from the slain demons. He wanted to use the money to support the families of those who died. Rio agreed immediately, though something nagged at him. When he first dropped through the 39th floor, he'd felt a strange barrier surrounding the 40th, but after defeating the demon prince, That barrier had vanished. Stranger still, when he probed earlier with magic, he'd sensed something unusual near the staircase. And if Ryo's instincts were right, this dungeon was about to get a whole lot weirder. The group plans to investigate the strange anomaly later, but for now, it's Magic Stone collection time. Even with all his years as a mage, Arthur admits this is the first time he's ever seen a devil's magic stone in person. No surprise, really, records on devils are basically non-existent. Since they appear out of nowhere, some scholars speculate they use space-time magic, but no one's been able to confirm that theory. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the world, the hero's party activates an altar to summon the Demon Lord. A portal opens and out steps Leonor. The hero immediately points his sword and dramatically declares, "Behold, the Demon Lord," which just leaves Leonor standing there confused, like, wait, since when did I get a promotion? Truth be told, she only showed up because she sensed some weird energy and wanted to check it out. But when she hears this guy is supposed to be a hero, she gets excited. Surely a strong opponent, or not. The moment they clash, her sword goes straight through his chest, effortlessly. She wasn't even trying. Talk about disappointment. She pulls her blade back and looks at the rest of the party, who are frozen in terror. Leonor isn't actually fond of killing people, so she teleports behind their mage and tells the group to pack it up, go home, and tend to their friend, since, lucky for him, she avoided all vital organs. If they hurry, he'll probably survive. The hero's party, to their credit, accepts her mercy. They rush to heal their fallen leader, while Leonor checks out the altar. The fight may have been a total flop, but the magic gem they used to summon her, now that's interesting. She casually yoinks it into her storage, and when the hero yells at her to stop, she sighs and clarifies again, "I'm not the Demon Lord." The party is baffled. If she isn't the Demon Lord, how could she be so much stronger than him? Leonor shrugs, it's not her fault they're weaklings. Still, she tosses them a tiny compliment. If they work together, they could probably take down the real Demon Lord someday. Probably. But compared to her, no contest. The hero is devastated at the thought that being stronger than the Demon Lord even exists. How's he supposed to compete with that? Leonor, feeling generous, mentions she once fought a human who matched her strength, Mihara, Ryo. Fighting him was exhilarating, and if she had to power scale, she'd say Ryo is about 10,000 times stronger than this so-called hero. With that mic drop, she teleports away, leaving the party to, well, figure out what to do with their day. Back in the dungeon, Mihara, Ryo and the adventurers finally reach the staircase. Ryo shows Arthur the strange anomaly he mentioned earlier. It looks like a magic gem, but Arthur has never seen anything like it before. Not one to leave a mystery behind, he stashes it in a storage bag for later analysis, and the group continues their journey back to the surface. Everyone eventually makes it back to the surface, where Hugh immediately begins organizing care for the injured adventurers. Meanwhile, Natalie rushes over to check on Abel and the others. Abel gratefully thanks her, pointing out that if she hadn't dashed off to get Ryo, they'd still be decorating the dungeon floor as skeleton art. Things are wrapping up nicely until Hugh suddenly remembers he has unfinished business. He calls out to Ryo and demands to know why he charged past the guards into the dungeon when he knew perfectly well it was off limits. Ryo, caught off guard, apologizes sheepishly. He honestly didn't expect Hugh to circle back to that detail. Before it gets awkward, Arthur jumps in to defend Ryo, insisting that without his reckless dash, none of them would have survived. This shocks Hugh, who presses for an explanation, but Arthur, ever the tactician, asks him to step into a private tent before discussing it further. Once alone, Arthur spills the whole truth. Devils, the Demon Prince, near-death battles, it's basically a horror story. Hugh can barely believe what he's hearing. The appearance of devils at a time like this is beyond insane, and the fact that they survived is nothing short of miraculous. He naturally assumes Abel must have fought like a legend. While Arthur agrees Abel's performance was brilliant, he adds that even Abel was completely outclassed by the Demon Prince. It was only when Ryo showed up that things turned around. Still processing, Hugh admits he knew Ryo was gifted, but never imagined he could take on a Demon Prince solo. That's when Arthur drops the bomb. Take on isn't even the right phrase, it was a slaughter. Ryo wiped out the prince and his entire squad in seconds. The sheer level of magic he displayed was terrifying. Because of that, Arthur insists their top priority now must be keeping Ryo on the kingdom's good side. If he were ever to become their enemy, it would spell disaster. To prevent political idiots from meddling, Arthur asks Hugh to help erase all traces of Ryu's overwhelming strength from the official report. No need to give the aristocrats any dangerous ideas. The next morning, Ryo is wandering through town when a mouth-watering aroma leads him to a local restaurant famous for its curry. And what do you know? Sarah is already seated inside. She looks just as surprised to see him, though she quickly shrugs. It's curry, who can resist? They place their orders, and while waiting, Sarah asks Ryo where he's living. When he mentions the guild dorms, she's stunned. Only rookies usually stay there. But since Ryo technically registered as a rookie, despite being promoted to D rank right away, it makes sense. Sarah admits she's impressed. Promotions like that don't happen often, but his strength is obvious. After finishing their meal, the two step outside. Curious, Ryo asks why he never sees her at the guild despite her being an adventurer. She explains it's simple. She has a long-term contract in the royal capital. In fact, she's the sword instructor for the Margrave's order. Since they're already talking swords, she grins and asks if he has any plans. Why? Because she'd like nothing more than a friendly spar with him. A few minutes later, Ryo and Sarah find themselves in the training arena, ready to spar. Before they begin, Ryo tilts his head and asks her how she even knew he was a swordsman. After all, everyone assumes he's just a mage. Sarah smirks and explains it was obvious from his movements and stance. Plus, she adds, it's not exactly rare for mages to cheat on magic with a shiny blade on the side. The match begins. Sarah lunges at Ryo with blistering speed, but he reacts in time and counters. That alone makes her light up with excitement. Almost nobody ever dodges her opening strike. Ryo, on the other hand, is stunned. He wasn't expecting Sarah to be that fast. And she cheerfully admits she wasn't even going all out. Alright, she declares, serious mode on. Ryo does his best to withstand her relentless flurry of strikes, but it's like trying to swat a hurricane with a fly swatter. Eventually, he's overwhelmed. When the match ends, Sarah can't contain her excitement. She hugs Ryo on the spot, praising his talent. After all, very few can last that long against her, especially since she was secretly boosting her speed with wind magic, while Ryo wasn't even using any magic at all. Talk about fighting with one hand tied behind her back. She'd love to spar more, but unfortunately, she has a tutoring session with the Margrave's son, so she has to dash. After saying goodbye, Ryo heads home, only to bump into Hugh on the way. They end up traveling back to the guild together. Hugh asks Ryo to hop in, saying he has something to discuss. Naturally, it's about that little incident with Ryo, aka Dungeon Crasher Extraordinaire, sneaking past the guards. But instead of scolding, Hugh reassures him not to be nervous. Arthur already told him how much Ryo contributed to saving the team, and he's deeply grateful. Still, rules are rules, and technically Ryo needs to be punished. The punishment? A job. Ryo blinks in confusion, since when is getting free work considered punishment? Hugh, however, just waves it off and tells him not to overthink it. His punishment is an escort mission that will take him on a round trip to the city of Whitmash. Mandatory quest disguised as punishment. Classic guild move. The next day, Nils approaches Ryo with a favor to ask. His hometown recently put out a hunting request, but it's rated for D rankers and above. Since Nils can't take it alone, he asks Ryo to form a party with him so they can accept the mission together. At first, Ryo isn't interested. Money isn't exactly his motivation. But when he hears the words goblins and skeletons, he immediately changes his mind. Why? Because in his words, this sounds like the perfect chance to bully some weak mobs. Nils doesn't fully get what that means, but he's just happy Ryo agreed. They head over to the guildmaster's office to make it official. Hugh gives them the green light, but warns that 2 other parties have already failed this mission, 1 A rank, 1 D rank. And strangely enough, it wasn't the monsters that caused the failures, it was the villagers who outright refused to cooperate. According to reports, the last group also ran into about 30 skeletons, which left them badly injured. Hugh shakes his head, still baffled how a full D rank team struggled that badly against goblins and skeletons. Still, with Ryo around, he's confident this party will be fine. Plus, Ryo still has a few days before his upcoming escort mission, so the timing works out. With permission granted, they set out immediately. After half a day of walking, the group arrives at Nils's hometown, cat. To everyone's surprise, the locals greet Nils with warm smiles. Ryo blinks in disbelief. He had honestly assumed Nils became an adventurer because he'd been banished from his village. Nils glares and insists that's not the case. Sure, he admits he caused his fair share of childhood chaos, probably broke more windows than he could count, but banishment? Nope. He quickly changes the subject and leads the group to the mayor's house. When Nils steps inside, the mayor, Bulin, lights up with joy. It's been a whole year since Nils left, and his return is clearly a big deal. Nils notices the rest of his party standing awkwardly by the doorway, so he quickly introduces them to Bulin. Everyone takes a seat, ready to discuss the mission. Bulin admits he's relieved that Nils and his friends will be handling the request after all. Nils already understands the village's traditions, which saves him a headache. But then Nils cuts straight to the point. Is it true, he asks, that the last adventurers you called here got zero cooperation from the villagers? Bulin sighs and nods. He explains that skeletons began appearing at the edge of the eastern forest, first a few, but soon enough, the woods were crawling with them. So he put in a formal request for adventurers to hunt them down. The first party that came did fight the skeletons, but they made the mistake of dragging the battle somewhere they absolutely shouldn't have. Hearing this, Nils practically jumps out of his chair. Wait, don't tell me they fought deep in the eastern forest. Bulin admits that yes, that's exactly what happened. The villagers were furious because blood had been spilled in that part of the forest. He also admits maybe they overreacted since the adventurers were fighting for their lives, but the taboo still shook everyone badly. Realizing his companions are totally lost, Nils explains, the eastern forest is tied to one of the village's biggest secrets. Unfortunately, he can't tell them more until he gets permission from the village elders. For now, he asks them to be patient. While Nils meets with the elders, the others rest at his house, where they chat with his brother, Nelloy. He's happy Nils returned with such trustworthy allies. He explains that the last group of adventurers had ignored the village's warnings and stormed straight into the forest, which is why the villagers wanted nothing to do with them. But you guys, he smiles, are different. Soon, Nils returns with good news. The council gave their blessing to start the hunt. First, they'll track goblins during the day, then deal with the skeletons. Even better, Nils now has permission to share the village's secret, with one condition. Everyone must promise to keep it to themselves. They all agree, and Nils reveals the truth. The first secret is that the eastern forest is guarded by a guardian beast. This stuns everyone. Ryo is especially amazed. In fact, a mischievous thought crosses his mind. What if the beast turns evil? Then I'd have an excuse to fight it. Luckily, he keeps that to himself and quickly changes the subject. He asks what the second secret is. Nils answers, the shrine. But this one, he says, the village elder insists on explaining personally, so they'll have to wait until tomorrow. The next morning, the group heads into the forest, where Bulin shows them the last place goblins were spotted. Normally, a handful of goblins wouldn't be much of a problem, but since the village kids play around here, everyone knows that goblins plus kids equals a disaster waiting to happen. Just then, Rio senses a goblin squad heading their way and warns everyone to get ready. There are about 10 of them, so Nils suggests killing all but one so the survivor can lead them to the nest. Rio agrees and the party hides in ambush. When the goblins come close enough, Rio casts his Ice Beam spell. From the goblin's perspective, this must have been nightmare fuel. One second you're strolling through the woods with your bros, and the next, Gob Jr. is frozen solid and gets his head popped like a snow cone. The lone survivor bolts, but Rio and the team chase it down, eventually finding the nest. The poor goblin frantically explains to the others that its squad turned into popsicles, only to end up frozen solid itself. The other goblins, upon hearing this, collectively decide, nope, and start running away. But Rio isn't in a merciful mood. He freezes the lot of them, while Nils and Ammon gleefully smash them to pieces like kids at an ice festival. When they reach the cave entrance, Nils and Ammon hear something big coming. They brace themselves, only to be horrified when a goblin general steps out, beating this thing alone. Impossible. Luckily, they're not alone. Rio busts out a stronger ice beam, slamming the general to the ground, and asks Nils to finish the job. Honestly, having Rio on the team feels like playing on easy mode, but hey, They just killed a goblin general and its core is worth a fortune. Back in town, the group is introduced to Nasu, the village elder. She's already heard about the goblin general takedown and leads them to meet the guardian beast. Ryo is hyped, expecting a big battle, but his excitement deflates when he realizes the beast isn't evil, so no boss fight today. The beast examines the boys Nasu brought for the hunting mission. Pretty standard stuff until his gaze lands on Ryo. Suddenly, his whole demeanor changes. Introducing himself as Enkousin, the guardian beast shocks both Nasu and Bulan, since he's never revealed his name to anyone before. Enkousin admits he usually keeps his name hidden because humans butcher the pronunciation, but with Ryo, it would feel disrespectful not to share. Ryo, baffled at the politeness, listens as Enkousin explains that he's part Fae, and being near Ryo makes him feel, well, oddly pleasant. Ryo recalls that Sarah once mentioned the Fairy King had taken a liking to him too, and wonders if he has some weird fairy attracting gene. Ryo thanks Enkousin for the compliment, but the beast insists it's he who should be grateful. Meeting Ryo makes him feel like he could happily live another 1,000 years. Finally, Enkousin explains their actual mission. Around 30 skeletons have gathered near the shrine, including one massive one sealed inside. He's been using his power to keep it sealed for now. After defeating all the skeletons outside the shrine, Enkousin prepares to release the big one so the group can finish the job. They march up to the shrine and Ito doesn't waste a second. He flashes his light magic to exorcise the skeletons hanging around out front. But now comes the real fun, the monster inside. The doors creak open, and to everyone's horror and Ryo's slight excitement, a gigantic, arched skeleton looms before them. And no, Enkousin wasn't exaggerating. This thing looks like it skipped leg day, but went all in on terrifying size. Ryo quickly conjures icy hammers for Ammon and Nils, then signals Enkousin to release the beast. The skeleton bursts out like it's late for a concert, but Ryo lays down a slick sheet of ice, sending it tumbling face first. Ammon and Nils swing away, but the skeleton soon realizes it's outmatched and starts crawling off in a last-ditch escape attempt. Too bad for him, Ryo designed the ice to be slipperier than a freshly waxed dance floor. The poor bag of bones slips again, crashes down, and Nils seizes the chance, snapping its neck clean in half. With the threat handled, the group heads inside. Nasu is practically glowing with excitement. This is her first time actually stepping foot into the shrine. Inside, they find a statue of the Earth Mother Goddess, but something's off. The jewel embedded in it is cracked. It was supposed to shine brilliantly like a divine disco ball, but instead looks like it's been through hard times. Nasu quickly realizes what happened. Enkousin had sensed strange energy in the area earlier, and sure enough, the shrine was the source. That cracked jewel was leaking power, which explains the sudden monster spawns like some kind of buy one, get one free nightmare event. Nasu applies a proper seal to prevent it from happening again. With their mission finally complete, Ryo and the others bid farewell to the villagers and begin their journey back to Lawn. On the road, Nils and Ito realize it's almost their one-year adventure anniversary, which means their free guild dorm stay is expiring. Time to pay rent like the rest of society. They're already considering buying a house and invite the others to join them. Ammon immediately says yes. He clearly enjoys living with Nils and Ito. Ryo, however, plays it cool and says he needs time to think it over. After all, committing to roommates is almost as serious as committing to a battle strategy. Meanwhile, back in Lawn, Hugh McGrath asks Abel to fill in for him as the representative at the Whitnash Open Port Festival. Normally, Hugh would have thrown this job at Phelps, but the guy is already drowning in other duties. That leaves Abel as the unlucky, trusted replacement. Over in the Empire, news spreads that the commander of the Mage Order will also be attending the Whitnash Festival. And she won't be coming alone. Her right-hand spellslinger, the Inferno Magician, will be tagging along too. In short, the festival just got upgraded from boring speeches to possible magical fireworks show.